Okay, welcome back. It's Good Morning Nigeria as always on the network service. Now, it's just a few days to the deadline for old Naira notes to cease being legal tender. And will the Apex Bank be able to address the alleged scarcity of new Naira notes? There's also been call by the National Assembly for a 6-month extension of this deadline. Now, this is the prompt for our conversation on this matter. Of course, we will also be talking about the new CBN monetary policy rates. All right, so let's join our correspondent Abdul Salam Jubril for the background report.
These days, banking halls and banks' automated teller machine, that is ATMs, have become popular destination spots for many Nigerians. This is because the 31st January deadline for the exchange of old Naira notes set by the Central Bank of Nigeria (CBN) is fast approaching. Recall that the CBN on October 26, 2022 had announced its plan to redesign 3 banknotes. There have, however, been concerns from many Nigerians over the slow spread of the new notes that includes scarcity of the notes at banks and complaints that banks ought to have stopped loading old notes in their ATM since it will not be accepted as legal tender by the end of the month. The National Assembly and the 36 state governors have also waded in, urging the bank to extend the date to enable more Nigerians get the new notes. At the CBN's Monetary Policy Committee MPC meeting yesterday, however, the CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele stated that the January 31st, 2023 deadline stands. At the MPC meeting also, the CBN raised the monetary policy rate MPR, which measures interest rate, to 17.5%. Recall that in November last year, the bank raised the MPR to 16.50% from 15.50%. The MPC also hiked the MPR in May 2022 to 13% from 11.50%. Another hike was announced in July 2022 from 13 to 14%, and a further hike in September to 15.5%. In 2022, the MPC so far raised the MPR by 500 basis points. What does this mean to ordinary Nigerians and the economy? With just a few days away to the deadline, will the Apex Bank be able to address the alleged scarcity of new Naira notes? Guest on Good Morning Nigeria will be speaking to these and more shortly.
Many thanks, Abdul Salam Jibril, for the background. Now, joining us to discuss issues around the new Naira notes and the MPC resolutions, we have our regular guests, 3 of them, and then, of course, we'll be joined later on by another guest. Here in the studios, Professor Uche Waleke of the Finance and Capital Markets at Nasarawa State University. Is also President Association of Capital Market Academics. Professor Waleke, we're glad to have you this morning.
Thank you so much, Kinsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
Also here in the studios is Dr. Tokwe Fashua, is founder and CEO Global Analytics Consulting. Dr. Fashua, we're glad to have you in the studios.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Thank you.
Right, we'll be joined via Zoom from Hyderabad in South India, Shuaibu Idris. And Shuaibu Idris is Managing Director, CEO, Timeline Consult. Mr. Idris, good morning. Thank you for joining us all the way from India.
Good morning, Claire, and good morning, Kinsley. Once again, good morning, fellow discussers.
All right, we're told another guest will be joining us much later. That's Dr. Folabi Uluwukiri. When he does join us, we'll introduce him appropriately.
All right, gentlemen, again, we're glad to have you. When the CBN announced the policy on the new Naira notes, I recall you were all our guests here in Abuja, our headquarters studios, discussing aspects around the new Naira notes. Now we have just 6 days to the expiration of the deadline, which is January the 31st. There are comments from some quarters that, no, this is not feasible. Extend it. The National Assembly relying on the matters of urgent public interest. National Assembly, that's to say the House and the Senate, have also weighed in, requesting the central bank to extend the deadline by 6 months up to July the 31st. And of course, we are having reports this morning from the front page of the Punch newspaper showing that people in a number of states are rushing to deposit or exchange the outgoing Naira notes. But, gentlemen, is there any need for the hula baloo around the deadline that is looming now? Or we just say that the deadline comes, and if you are still stuck with the old Naira notes, then it becomes your memento. Tokwe, let's begin with you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I think my position remains. I was here when they launched. We came here to discuss it. I don't see any reason for the hula baloo, as you put it, because the currency management function is a routine function. As I may have repeated, as I will repeat again, as I may have said earlier on, it's 17 years since the last, the last change was made on the currency. Major change. That was the introduction of the 1,000 Naira notes in fact, perhaps 18 years now, in 2005. Before then, it was 2001, 2002, when the 200 Naira was introduced, 2003, I think, when the 500 was introduced, and so on and so forth. So there was a certain kind of regularity in terms of currency management that we lost. We lost that regularity. And if you look at central bank as an institution, they have different departments that their different work comes together as monetary policy. They have a trade and exchange department that worries about the Naira and import and export. They have a banking supervision department that takes care of banks locally to ensure there's financial stability. They have other departments that look at microfinance and so on. And they have this currency management department, which is supposed to look at the currency and look for the fitness of the currency. And not only that, we also look at are we moving in tandem with the rest of the world in terms of policy, in terms of sophistication, and so on and so forth. And this is, I think, a culmination of the work of that department. There's no big deal about it, except someone is telling me that we're stuck. I see, I think it was year 2000 or thereabouts, or in the turn of the millennium, that this man, Francis Fukuyama, wrote a book and titled it The End of History. And the idea was just because the Soviet Union had fallen and the Berlin Wall had collapsed, and they made a big statement about the fact that now we would have a unipolar world, and capitalism was it for everybody, socialism was dead, and therefore you had to toe one line. But they were not looking at China coming from the cold with its idea of social capitalism, or in fact state-led capitalism, was a different phenomenon. Nobody should say that because we are used to something, therefore we will not change. Because we are used to this current currency does not mean that we will not change the currency from time to time. This one that they have put will also change in time. And so I think that the role, we saw a lot of cynicism that came with it from the beginning. People just don't want to hear about it. People were saying, is this the priority for central bank? You cannot actually sit in your office and determine the priority for central bank as an institution that has maybe 5,000 people or 6,000 people working there, with the largest concentration of PhD holders in this country in one location. There must be some thinking that has gone behind that. Forget about all these politics we play. The same issues we have now, we may have had it in 1984. What's the difference? The difference today, Madam Claire, is that we now are on social media, and everybody is a guru, everybody is NTA, everybody is a news broadcaster, everybody wants to blow. And that's the difference between where we are now, and I think it's unnecessary, if you ask me.
Okay, Tokwe, thank you. And I don't know if China was exclusively capitalist ab initio, and China infused capitalist principles into their, So Fukuyama, in a way, was right.
Indeed.
In a way. Okay, so Professor Waleke,
Yes.
I'm wondering, again, we shouldn't join the bandwagon because abroad is doing like this. So we must follow and catch up, play catch up. No, we must situate the instruments that we deploy, to particular targets
Yes.
in the economy, to restructure or to solve a problem,
Yes.
that is peculiar with us. And I
Yes.
think this is what CBN. My question is, would it hurt the economy if CBN stayed action on the deadline in any way? Is there a particular target that extending the deadline will impact?
Yeah, Claire, before I speak to the deadline, the arguments in favor of the currency redesign, bear repeating. Which is, the fact that you have so much currency out there, and it makes monetary policy implementation difficult for the central bank. Okay, when you have so much currency out. And the central bank governor, I think, made the same point even during the last MPC meeting when he said 3.2 trillion, was outside. 3.2 trillion was currency in circulation, out of which over 2 trillion, 2.7 or thereabouts, outside the banking system. So that is one key point. And of course, central bank too have always said that it makes their work difficult. The cost of printing currency, the cost of destroying currency on the part of banks themselves, okay, the cost of processing currency, the cost of moving currency around, the cost of even protecting it, guarding it, okay, these are costs that also, have a pass-through to even the cost of banking services. So the advantages are there, no doubt, and I support currency redesign. Now, on the issue of deadline, I wasn't expecting the central bank governor yesterday to come and say he was going to extend the deadline. I wasn't expecting him to say that, because if he had said that, that could make some people relax. But I think that the January 31st deadline, will eventually be extended, because the way it is now, in view of the fact that the new notes are still scarce, in view of the fact that central bank cash swap program, just started, they just introduced it on Monday. Okay, if you take all that into consideration, look, I have a feeling that by January 30th, the central bank will have need to, have an extension. But I'm not going to subscribe to the extension that the National Assembly is asking for up till June. No, but if they can, if they can have an extension of say 2 weeks. Remember, there is a purpose for the currency redesign, and one of the reasons
that's what I'm asking,
to prevent vote buying.
That's what I'm asking.
So if you move it till June, the end will have been defeated. So, but they can have a 2 week extension, okay, maybe terminating sometime on maybe around 14th of February, to enable at least the cash swap program to have effect in the rural communities. I tell you something too. If you look at the case of India, India had a similar exercise in 2016. I was also looking at the history and story around what they did in 2016. It was the Prime Minister himself, to tell you the importance of it, it was the Prime Minister that made the announcement on November 18th. It took effect on November 8th, and it took effect from November 10 to January 31st of 2016. Now, when the period lapsed, now what they said was that those that were unable to deposit, exchange the old notes for the new notes, still had a 3-month window to do that. But this time, if you had those old notes, you take them to the central bank. You take them to the Reserve Bank of India. So this kind of arrangement too we can have. So if anybody is stuck with it by January 30th or 31st, the person should be allowed to go and deposit them at any of the branches of the central bank, provided they are also required to provide a declaration on what they are depositing. So I'm saying that
deposit at whose cost?
The central bank branches.
Yes, is it at the depositor's cost?
Yes, you take your old notes to
the
yes, and get the new ones, but they give you a form, a currency declaration form, which you fill. Okay. So that's what happened.
And presumably, if you are prescribing that for our situation,
yes,
it means that persons who still have a large haul of those old outgoing currency notes will be slipping between now and January 31st.
No. I'm saying if yes,
no. I say will. They're not that should be. They will sleeping between now and then.
So
no, I am saying in the event that you have such, because as I've just said,
you have money, don't know where it is. People are excavating the money from their people are excavating money from their sitting room.
Yes.
No, but this is a prescription.
Today is 25th. Am I right? Yes, and it will just a few days.
Not a few days, 6 days.
Yes, 6 days.
Yes.
And I'm saying the cash swap program, has just been introduced.
Cash swap is only just a supplementary means for the exchange.
Yes, I'm saying it will require time to gain traction, particularly in the rural areas, rural communities.
So the rural people will now be the ones to go to the branch of the central bank.
No, the same agents.
No, I'm not. And the same agents will be the ones to go to the central bank.
Any of the central bank branches.
Yes. All right. No, Professor Waleke.
I'm just telling you what happened in India.
I understand.
Yes.
I understand.
Yes.
I mean, it's a prescription to say, look, could we learn from this? And that's why I also threw in the fact that, okay, we are speaking today now. We're not discussing today being January 31st. We're saying that today is January 25th. So those who have, large sums, just put your feet on the money that you have, and then the February 1st, you're going to be looking for the nearest branch of TBN in your city so that you can deposit it. But more seriously, I mean, that's one idea to take a look at, assuming that becomes an issue. But let's join Shuaibu Idris now, of course, who is in South India, joining us via Zoom. Shuaibu Idris, once again, welcome to the program. You've, of course, been following the progress, and you were also part of this conversation with regard to the outgoing Naira notes. And we must also be clear that the Naira notes are perhaps just, not perhaps, they are one aspect of a mix of issues around the cashless policy. The central bank had initially indicated how much cash individuals and corporate entities could withdraw per month and from ATMs. And then when there were voices that objected to that, the CBN itself then revised it. Previously it was 100,000 for individuals. Now it's 500,000 Naira cash. Whatever else you need to do, process it through the banking system. That's to say, either you use electronic means or other valid means of doing this. So we're looking at the totality of the cashless policy, of which the outgoing Naira notes form just a part. Again, I pose the same question to you. Is there a need for the hula baloo around all of this?
Good morning once again, Kingsley, and thanks once again for having me. I believe sincerely that Professor Uche Owaleke and indeed the position on the subject matter. I can tell you, in all honesty, there is no reason for all this hullabaloo about exchange of Naira or redesign or the window given by the central bank. I believe we should all give it to the Central Bank of Nigeria that they would have had a thorough interrogation of the process of this Naira redesign before they came out with the policy, and indeed even the 45 days or thereabout window to exchange. I'm sure the Central Bank of Nigeria officials would not have just woken up one day and said, okay, guys, go and exchange this Naira in 45 days. So we don't.
We are losing your audio. We can see you, but we are losing your audio. Maybe it's a bandwidth challenge. If our engineers are able to sort that out, then we come back, we'll get back to you. Otherwise, we'll return to the studios and then continue the conversation. It's
classic now.
as I said, your video is good, but the audio is distorted. All right, can we hear him now?
I can hear you.
All right, loud and clear too. All right, just...
should I come then?
All right, Shoaibu Idris, just start from where you started answering the question.
Yeah, what I was saying was we should give it to the Central Bank of Nigeria that the managers of the couldn't have got to work out from the number to see 45 days is going to be the period when we do the exchange of this new Naira. No, they could have done some research, some interrogation before they arrive at the 45 days with their...
It looks, Shoaibu, well, sorry, we will get our engineers to have a conversation with you offline so that whatever the challenges are, we'll get them to start it, because we know that, as always, because based on your previous banking experience as well as extensive experience in the private sector, you will have comments to make on this particular aspect. So back to the studios, Dr. Tokwe Fashua. We're coming back again, the same question I posed to Shoaibu Idris around the entire cashless policy. That's to say, look, new Naira notes are only a part of that mix. Is it something that we should continue to forge ahead with, and with all the collateral benefits? Some would say that hopefully it might help in cutting down on transactional politics, on corruption in the private and public sectors, where movement of cash is a facilitator of bribery and corruption.
Thank you very much. And these are very, see, the policy, like they say, when you follow the money, right? I mean, it's a very potent weapon. I mean, against anything in this world. The United States, for example, has been fighting the war against terrorism. They probably will tell us that one of the most effective weapons you can use to tackle terrorism is to follow the money. So you know where the terrorists are donating money, who they are donating money to, how are they collecting the money. Follow the money. We spend so much money on all these problems of Boko Haram, kidnapping and all of that. Purchasing weaponry from even the one we had to pay $500 million, cash money, 496 million precisely, to the United States when Donald Trump was there to purchase the Tucano whatever. And they told us that they will supply in 2024. So we were paying that money like 4 years in advance. I think they managed to beat the deadline, but when all we could do is also follow the money. So in following the money, it's easier to follow the money electronically, and that is part of the policy now. So that's what I'm saying, that look, when you're looking at an institution, we have to assume and understand that quite a bit of thinking. For example, this is NTA. You don't expect that NTA just beams to the world every day. There's planning that goes behind. So people put heads together to say, listen, everybody reports on their schedule. So you deliver this, deliver that, and this is just one. So this currency policy, whether they change and all of that. Now, one thing I want to try and clarify, which I don't think I heard it said, that this policy is geared at the politics or election. I have not heard that declared, honestly, by the central bank. If they did that, it's a big mistake. So you don't get mixed up in politics.
No, they haven't said
so
that.
So actually...
the CBN hasn't said
yes,
that.
I don't think it's been said. If it was said, it's a big mistake. You don't get involved in that. It's not your remit. However, and which means also that even
indirectly so.
People can assume. You may not actually, because again, that takes you on a different direction. Why is the central bank interested in, except maybe the president is. And remember that the central bank itself, because of the independence it has a direct line of sight direct to the president. So the president can say, listen, I want you to do this because I want the election to be clean. I don't want people to say that I enabled my party. And I think that's the thinking that the president has.
No, so that what the president said, so that you can take this along.
Exactly.
What the president has said openly, and this is on video, that nobody should have access to public funds from any of the agencies for electioneering purposes,
which is good. So because the central bank has a line of sight to the president, that could be imputed. However, it's not what the central bank itself should admit to do because central banking is not. However, when you look at, let's take the politics aside, we talk about the criminality going on in the country. The fact that there's a thriving industry for forgery of currency in this country. If you Googled it, you see in every state in this country, they have caught people trying to forge this same currency, before. And in fact, my own thinking would have been that this currency should have gone polymer fully, the way other currencies are going in the rest of the world. Polymer currency, you can't even hold 100 pieces in your hand very comfortably. It kind of slips away. And it's much more difficult to forge. So maybe we'll still get there. And like I said earlier on, this currency, maybe in another 5 years, should also be changed. A little bit of tweak here and there. And of course, the whole world is going cashless. And when you go cashless, one thing that makes me very happy is that we're going to have what we call value for money increasing in public procurement. Because now we're saying that, okay, less cash movement. Even they said no withdrawal of cash from public sector accounts, which is another good one, And therefore, and of course, it's going to be a lot more difficult for people to haul huge amounts of money to go and pay bribery. Or the next thing that the central bank, of course, will have to do is to also take this reform to the foreign exchange market. I've given advice, I write on all of these things. When you take it to the foreign exchange market, so by the time you cannot carry a lot of cash to the malam standing by the roadside to give you $1 to go and deliver bribery in one. Look, we are all in this country together. Whatever little sacrifice we have to make this country better and great, let us make it. And, we can always define it to ourselves and let everybody know where we're going. This is a policy that is a follow the money policy that links to several aspects, whether we're talking about crime, criminality, terrorism, kidnapping, bribery and corruption, very low value for money in public procurement. It all helps. All right, for me, personally, Madam Claire, I've had no problems whatsoever. Because I'm not going around carrying cash and distributing on the road. Many of these politicians, sorry, madam, sorry. One of these politicians, I heard what the National Assembly was saying yesterday. You want to postpone by 6 months. They probably want to truncate it. So listen, for how long will we continue with this idea of people lying that it is because of rural area they are carrying cash up and down? When you give somebody 500 million cash, at the end of the day, only 5 million will get to those same poor people. We want the money to get to them directly by way of infrastructure.
Thank you, thank you very much. And talking about the, objectives or what the policy seeks to address, the issues of criminality. I don't think Nigerians, I don't think those issues are in contest. I don't think anybody is, we've gone past the fact that, okay, what is this supposed to do? What is this supposed to do? I think you hit the nail on the head. The issue, the context now is whether or not, CBN should extend and, what are the processes of retrieving the old Naira notes. But first, before I come back to you, Professor Waleke, Dr. Folabi Oluokere just joined us via Zoom from Lagos, and is Managing Director and Chief Economist of Analyst Data Services and Resources Limited. We'd like to welcome you to the program, Dr. Oluokere.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, please just
nice to be here. All right,
just to put you on hold and return to you presently, Professor Waleke. I'm just wondering. Earlier on, you gave us the amount of money CBN said was,
outside the
yes, 3.2, 2 trillion.
2.7 trillion.
Now, out of that, 2 was outside. Now, within the time frame so far, has CBN been able to mop up the 2.something trillion that it said was outside? If that is the case, the 6-month extension deadline that CBN is asking would not be, tenable. But how much has CBN itself been able to mop up within this framework? How much is left out? I think if CBN uses those yardsticks, it will now determine whether or not to extend. Is the 6 months? You said 6 months was not. You're not in support of 6 months yourself. Yes. Do you think that the process so far of collection, is it seamless? Is it such that everybody?
Yes. Claire, if you listen to the CBN governor during the MPC meeting, I think he made it clear He said out of the 2.7 million, CBN... Trillion, 2.7 trillion. CBN has been able to rake in over 1 trillion. 1.5. Yes. 1.7. Not up to, yes, he said not up to not up to 2 trillion, if I heard him right. Not up to 2 trillion. So that means you still have substantial quantity of money, circulating outside. And he said he hoped that within this short period of time, that the bulk of it, would come in. That was why that was why I made that point. Remember, I made a point. I said that I am for just an extension by a few days, maximum of 2 weeks, okay, such that it still happens before the election time. Yes, we may not directly tie politics into it, but I think one of the motives also behind it is to stem or to curtail, vote during this presidential election. So it has to happen before. So if you extend by 2 weeks, I don't think it's going to cause any, hot the economy. And as I also said earlier, I wasn't expecting the governor to make that pronouncement yesterday, because that will also make some people go to sleep. Okay, CBN, as a responsible institution, of course, it reacts or responds to events as they unfold. We saw what happened on December 5th. Clear, on December 5th, the CBN announced a cash withdrawal limit of 20,000 naira per day. Okay, but of course, with time, it became obvious that that cap was too low. Okay, and then based on evidence, why do I say based on evidence? It was much later that the central bank, deputy governor, when she appeared at the National Assembly, was saying that 94% of transactions that go through, withdrawals that go through the personal accounts, were less than 500,000. So I guess it was on the basis of that evidence that they now had to, they had to revise the cap from 100,000 per week to 500,000, per week. So that action was evidence-based. Now, and I'm saying right now they have said under the cash swap program, the maximum you can exchange is 10,000. And I'm also saying the cash swap program, from what I read, took effect from Monday. And these agents are supposed to sensitize the people in the rural communities, make them aware about the various channels, through which they can make payments. I'm saying 5 days or 6 days is not sufficient to be able to see all that through. And that's also why
6 months is ridiculous.
Yes, no, 6 months is out of it. So if on January 31st...
some people in some rural areas, in some rural communities, in some states of the Federation, are fully aware that 200, 500, and 1,000 Naira banknotes will be phased out. And they have therefore stopped accepting the outgoing notes in transactions, which isn't right because there is no legal tender.
Even in Abuja, okay, even the cash swap program says Lagos and Abuja excluded. But even in Abuja, approach any POS. Up to yesterday, any POS and say you want to withdraw money, you won't get you will hardly get the new Naira notes.
Yes, so yesterday was 1 week to the deadline.
Yes.
And we are saying now, Professor Uche Waleke,
yes.
I understand the argument you are making, but also the reality that we are faced with. Because Claire raised the question. The CBN says, I think they've gotten about 1.5, 1.7 trillion Naira. The cutoff date for that figure.
Still have much outside.
The cutoff date for that figure, I'm not quite sure what the cutoff date, and how many much more returns that they have received from the banks to say since we forwarded our papers, we have received 1 billion, 2 billion, another trillion, and so on and so forth. So that would be useful. Earlier we introduced Dr. Afolabi Olowokere via Zoom, joining us in Lagos. Dr. Olowokere, let's have your take on this issue, particularly the entire policy framework of cashless policy and the outgoing Naira notes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Once again, I'm sure I'm audible. Okay. So I think I've listened carefully to Professor Waleke, And for most of what he said, I think I quite agree. The central bank is a very responsible government agency, and I think he knows what he's doing. And it's also, for most of what he will do, they will also have to be evidence-based. And, you know, when it comes to the issue of evidence, you also gather them with time. It's not always that you gather them once and then you say, based on this, this is what I'm going to do, and that is final. In most of the cases, evidence is also dynamic. So having said that, let me now come to the issue of whether an extension is required or not. I'm sure the CBN is guarding its data. And I'm sure, I mean, when I say data, there are different types of data. We probably gather the data in terms of how much has been collected or exchanged. And it's also gathering the data in terms of the kind of pressure and interest groups, and also some consideration to the vulnerable groups and the rest. By the way, many people can also hide under the vulnerable Nigerian kind of argument. But definitely it's going to revive. I mean, I'm also thinking whether we tell the central bank or not, by the time he's able to gather his evidence, it should know whether to extend or not. But even if you are going to extend, you don't want to tell people now that I'm going to extend. By the time you say you are going to extend now, then everybody will just go and sit down. I mean, there is this issue about rounding figure issue in philosophy that people, once you say you have extended the date by 1 month, everybody will wait to date that 1 month. So the first thing to do now is to make sure that that 31st or 30th must hold. Then a lot of people will try as much as possible. Then you can see where you are. I think we can learn from, in the case of the capital market, when you were doing e-dividend and quite a number of things, where you set a deadline, but by the time you get that deadline, you observe what is with you, then you are able to revise appropriately. I'm not speaking for the central bank, but I think based on the evidence that will be with them at the end of this month, they will be able to determine whether they have to move forward or not. But whether it's a good policy, definitely is a good policy. And I like the way the central bank governor said yesterday, because I've always having this problem. I try to be an economist and try not to talk into issue of banditry, the other political issue, crisis, and the rest that you may want to use monetary policy to address. Even though monetary policy can, and I think before now, a lot of arguments have always been around that issue. Before now, I've always had a problem with the way people say it, even counterfeiting and monetary policy. That is another thing. So I think I was also a point of advice, and the central bank should also know better. Let's try to keep monetary policy to monetary policy. By the time we move into the area of other regulators or other aspects of society, we start seeing people who ordinarily would have allowed the policy to fly start fighting the policy. So monetary policy, you are changing the currency. You have to change the currency. Every country changes the currency. Why? Counterfeiting, a lot of some of these are old notes, and Nigeria has cashless policy. That is fine. But when it comes to the issue of somebody was saying change rate, inflation, people that are collecting ransom. I mean, people that are collecting ransom can also start collecting the new notes. It's even more pressure on the people that are going to be paying the ransom. So if we keep monetary policy to monetary policy and as much as possible remove the political aspect, then maybe there can be more success in this kind of thing. So it's a good policy, but definitely the central bank has to reevaluate based on the evidence that it has with itself. Thank you.
Dr. Afolabi Lowokere, thank you. We really don't know at what point the interferences is coming from, whether from your end or from our end, but I'm sure that our engineers are working to rectify it. So we just put you on hold while that is being done, and come back here to the studio. And I'm going to ask Dr. Tokbe Francois. I don't know why institutions, work at cross purposes, because I'm wondering if the National Assembly does not understand the direction, that the CBN is going to, because monetary policies are not just hullabaloo, wishful thinking, or somebody just wakes up in the morning and decides to, you understand? They are technical economic tools that are targeted to address a particular economic issue. So is it that the central bank does not understand that? The National Assembly does not understand that. Why is it that we are always asking and putting pressure when a new policy is about to be implemented? We're asking for deadline extension. We're asking for this and that. What is happening?
Thank you very much. Ordinarily, it's perhaps not only a National Assembly phenomenon, but becoming a general Nigerian phenomenon. Ask yourself, what has the government ever tried to do in recent times that Nigerians will not? No, don't do it, don't touch it, it's going to collapse everything. So I think, again, like I said, it's part of the social media phenomenon.
But those who should know.
I'll come to them. I'll come to the National Assembly. It's a social media phenomenon. Everybody wants to get here. It's good. I mean, the catharsis you get from being able to voice out and ventilate is great. However, when it becomes an obsession to always ventilate, and you wonder how many of us, whether youth or adults, sitting on the internet every day, just commenting per second, is it that we don't have anything to do again than to comment? And everybody is a newscaster now. Everybody wants to blow. Everybody's looking at how many likes there are on your post and all of that. So it's a problem, which maybe over time, it's something that even governments around the world sit down and say, listen, how do we orientate our people, reorientate them towards more productivity? As it pertains to the National Assembly in this instance, the point is that they are all politicians in the National Assembly, and they are actually looking at, how this is going to affect politics. Like I said before, beyond central bank, they should talk to the president on that. The president wants a legacy that would say that, look, he's an anti-corruption person. He did not help his party. Nobody will blame him and say if his party comes back in, they will say it's because he allowed them to. He wants to be able to show that, look, I put everything on the way of everybody. And you can see. And that's their politics. Let them do it. So, but anybody in the National Assembly who has not been close to their people, right? Okay, I have my own political preferences too, and I'm very confident that my political preference would work and will win because the person I support has for decades been investing in his politics. But if you are those kind of people that go every once in 4 years, then it's good for you if they kick you out. Okay, if they kick you out because you can no longer bribe now and you haven't been close to the people. But if you've been close to the people and you've done the right thing for them and they know you, you would win. That's what's going to go on. Those guys are panicking because of that. I mean, I heard even the president, I think, of the Senate saying that he said, in quote, most senatorial districts don't have banks. And I'm wondering, which senatorial district do you supervise that will not have a bank in this country? The central bank said there are 1.4 million super agents. Look, the banking, if you like, superstructure has changed from what it was in 1984 till date. Or in fact, what it was 10 years ago. We have all of these POSs hanging around the whole place these days. You have super agents, you have all sorts of things. You have PSB, NTA is a bank, Airtel is a bank, Glow is a bank. Everybody is a bank now. So are you saying under 2 weeks, and now I want to say this to one thing very quickly. What's going on is this. The printing of currency is coming up. I worked in banking operations for more than a decade anyway, so I'm a banker still. So the printing of currency is coming up. The withdrawal of the other currency of the old currencies is coming down. It gets to an inflection point, and before you know it, you begin to see more of the new currencies now. Little patience on the part of our people is all that's required. Nothing else. Right. And let's listen. Number one. Number two, sir, and finally, that we've been seeing some pictures. They say, oh, look at it. This currency, they printed this one. The thing is cutting out on this other side or something. Listen. And then we found out that, I told them, I said, listen, they're printing millions of this paper. Millions. So even when you talk about Six Sigma policy, where you look at minimal, negligible, errors, they can perhaps permit 6 out of 1 billion. Okay? So, and what has happened, we now found out that even in dollar, in 1 second, that even the dollar, they are defective. In pound, they are defective. In fact, what they do in the UK is they auction that defective currency for a lot of money.
All right.
And we use our own defective to mess our own country up on social media and say all sorts of things about this country.
All right.
It's not right.
Tokwe, thank you very much for the point that you have raised. I saw that on the social media circulating, and persons asked me the questions. And I said, Well, one, assuming that is the case, in printing you can have such errors, and that's why there are also wastes. If you've been in printing for many years, and banknotes are printed just like money, just that the specifications are not exactly the same. You have printing errors. If you are rolling out a newspaper, for instance, say 32-page newspaper or a 64-page newspaper, and your print run is supposed to be, say, let's say 200,000. The first roll that you get, some of them are waste because you are trying to get the right mix, the right color combination. Those wastes are kept aside. So if you keep the waste aside, at some persons in some newspaper houses, what they used to do is those waste is part of what they will gather together and then to go and try and go and sell. As newspapers, so they are waste because the papers the colors are not sharp, the print is not sharp, and so on and so forth. So if I get such a waste and I take a photograph of it, then you say, look, the old Naira note, the new Naira notes are useless. And I think the point that Tokwe made about saying, look, we must stop running our country down to say, because the Naira is part of our national symbol. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
All right, welcome back. If you've just joined in, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service. I'm told that Shuaibu Idris is back with us via Zoom, all the way from South India. I hope that your audio is as clear as your, what we see, your visual. Shuaibu Idris, are you with us?
Yeah, once again, good morning, Claire. I'm very much with you, and I have been following the conversation. Okay. Very interesting.
Okay, so let's have your own perspective to the issues. Of course, we've raised quite a number, ranging from the input of the National Assembly to, of course, the Nigerians, citizens themselves, what we think about, the currency, the quality of the currency, and what we post on social media. Various issues have been raised, and I'm sure, as you said, you've been with us.
Yeah, without risk of being repetitive, I think the three discussions clearly quality as well as popularity have been the discussion of the topic. Let's be fair, at least to the guys in Central Bank of Nigeria. When they set out to have this Naira refined, I'm sure they would have done a lot of research, a lot of investigation, and they have collected data which is coming out with the policy. The idea is short to achieve the current.
All right, we do apologize once again. We're having some good challenges with our audio. I do hope we're able to rectify that and return to Shuaibu Idris. Kinsley, you have a question for...
Well, yeah, it's a pity. Shuaibu Idris, of course, will understand whenever he's back in the country, we can always get him at the time we are discussing financial, economic, or business matters. He joins us usually from Lagos or from Kano or Kaduna. Today has been a rather poor day for his audio. Back to the studios. Professor Uche Waleke, now let's move on a bit away from cashless and the outgoing Naira notes and the new Naira notes. One of the resolutions yesterday by the Monetary Policy Committee meeting is to raise the NPR to 17.5%. We always talk about the knock-on effect on the cost of borrowing at a time. Yes, we know that it manages to tame inflation, as some experts would argue. But if the corridor we're looking at now is around 17.5, what is it going to cost you to borrow money from this, let me not say, this usurious system that we already run?
Yeah, well, Kinsley, I would, for me, it came as a surprise. I was actually expecting the MPC to hold the rates, but even if we are going to have an increase, I wasn't expecting an increase more than 50%, 50 basis points. That's talking about 16.5 to 17%. So 100 basis points, for me, is aggressiveness, moved, a bit.
To crash inflation.
Yes, too far. But again, we should also understand why the central bank is, doing that. Number one, inflation rate is still high at over 20%. The central bank, even on a month-on-month basis, between November and December, we saw an increase in inflation rate. So, and the primary function of the mandate of the central bank is to maintain price stability. So the central bank is more or less, saying, let me defend my territory. And the tool available to the central bank, happens to be the MPR. The central bank is also worried that there's pressure on the exchange rate. And by also raising the MPR, the central bank thinks that pressure, can come down. And you also look at the real rate of return, which is why the central bank thinks that by raising the MPR, it will succeed in narrowing the real rate of return. Okay, that has a way of also stemming, capital outflows, from Nigeria. So there are a lot of arguments for it. But if you also, on the other side, on the flip side, Kinsel has just mentioned the cost of borrowing. One thing that you expect to happen now is that the banks will reprice their loans. Okay, once the banks reprice their loans, it even jeopardizes the asset quality of banks. Okay, today the central bank tells us non-performing loans, has dropped to from 4.9 to 4.2%, which is below the 5% threshold. It tells us that liquidity ratio in the banking system is 44%, above the threshold of 30%. It also tells us the capital adequacy ratio is 13.8%, which is above 10%. So bank prudential ratios are fine. But I'm saying as you increase the MPR, you run the risk of jeopardizing the prudential ratios, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I've also said the cost of borrowing, will be high. And look at the 2023 budget. 6.3 trillion has been, earmarked for debt servicing alone. The moment you keep raising MPR, the moment you also, run the risk of increasing the, the size of the cost of debt servicing, because that means you're also going to be borrowing at a higher rate. Right. So it's not in the interest of fiscal policy. It's not in the interest of the real economy. Mm-hmm. GDP growth rate, came in at 2.25% third quarter, and that may not be unconnected with the, restrictive and contractually these measures the central bank, has taken between May and November. So as you tighten, as you increase MPR, okay, it has to be at the expense of growth, at the expense of output, and that is why in my opinion, I think the rates are rather high. At the World Economic Forum that just ended, the IMF chief was advising central bank governors not to be too quick to remove their leg from the throttle. That is, and that's what I think the central bank is doing, just heeding to that advice. Yeah. But we have to take into consideration our own peculiar circumstances. So in my view, the central bank should pause the rate hikes, okay, and continue what it is doing to help growth. This cash withdrawal thing limit, in my view, is one way to mop money from circulation and reduce money supply. Precisely. One thing monetary policy does is you want to reduce money supply, and since we have the cash withdrawal limit already in place. Please. Yes, I had thought that yes, you now pause the rate hikes.
Professor Waleke,
yes.
Thank you. Dr. Olokere, Dr. Olokere, if you're back on Zoom with us, my question is to you. I do hope you heard Professor Waleke, but sometimes we laymen in terms of the economy don't understand all the vicious circle that goes with some monetary policies and all that. For instance, what is going on? Fine, we've been able to keep inflation at at least drop back 0.13 basis points from 21.47 it was in November to 21.37 in December. Sorry?
21.34
in December, which is something to rejoice about, and all that. Now you are raising, the interest rates by 100 basis points, making, as Professor Walika had already said, borrowing difficult, loan repayment difficult, putting cost of production high, making prices of things high. Meanwhile, supply is at the lowest end. So you now have, I don't know if I'm correct, what you have, is it this supply pool, whatever? I don't know, Professor Waleke, So why do we go, in vicious circles? What are the basic considerations that the CBN, had in mind before raising the MPR to by 100 basis points?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, the way you explain the question, you are not a layman, so it's clear. For most times, let's even take it from a typical ailment. Most times, something is moving in a particular direction that you don't have. You then have to do the opposite in order to solve that particular problem. An economy can move out of what is called equilibrium. Then you must do something that is counter of it in order to bring it back to equilibrium. And there are many aspects of the economy that can distort the inflation rates. One major macroeconomic objective is to have a low and stable price level. And a central bank is saddled with that responsibility. And the central bank that is saddled with that responsibility has quite a number of tools it can use. But the most potent of its tool, or the most interesting and very useful of its tool, popular of its tool, is the anchor interest rates. So when inflation is getting out of hand, a central bank tool one way that it can do it is to raise interest rates. And because you said we are also talking to layman, but let's see how it works. Inflation means, it can mean one of two things or both. It means that maybe people have a lot of money chasing goods in the system. So there are few goods, but a lot of money are chasing those few goods. So everybody wants to buy it, then the price will go up. It's also possible that you don't have few goods, a lot of money, but you actually have few goods. So people don't have a lot of money, but relatively good, the goods are fewer. So both ways, it then depends on whether it's too much money or too few goods. For a central bank, what it can actually do in the short run is to address the too much money part. And that is why monetary policy most times is kind of like a short run approach to solving more fundamental problems of economies. Even though you can be doing it in succession for several years so that you address the point, but you need to still come back and solve the fundamental problem of the economy. So inflation, no doubt, as you mentioned in Nigeria, is high, above 20%. The fact that you had 100 some small thing change, that doesn't mean that it's a major achievement. The fact is, prices are still rising. It's only that the rate at which they are rising just fell by a bit value. So if you bought something at 100 Naira last year in December 2021, by December 2022, you are buying it at 120 Naira. And imagine your salary has not increased. Nothing around you has increased. In fact, in some cases, you also have to pay more for many other things. You know the impact of that. Imagine your salary is not increased for 5 years and prices increase 20% every year. That means at the end of 5 years, you are like 99% worse off than the way you started the 5 year. So inflation is bad for an economy. It's a measure of uncertainty in the macroeconomy. And the central bank has a mandate to address inflation. So, and one of the things that it can do is to increase the monetary policy rate. But as Professor Walike has said, when you do that, it's just like you also using drugs for your ailments. It also has some side effects. And I think if you then consult a good medical practitioner, he will be able to tell you the side effects and see whether the disease you are actually tackling is worse, or it's even better to leave the disease than to use the drug, because there are drugs like that. So in this particular case, when you increase NPR, it has implication for the rest of the economy, and quite a number of implications. And it's actually an empirical issue. Is to start looking at what's going to be.
All right, Dr. Afolabi Olowokoya, we need to pause you now and come back to the studio. So we also hear from Dr. Tokwe Fashua. I want to pose my question from where we faded you a moment ago, and that has to do with the wider implications of the CBN monetary policy resolution with regard to NPR. Dr. Fashua, look, we're talking about the health of the macroeconomic environment, and monetary policy is only but one of the tools that can be used to stabilize the macroeconomic environment. I know that experts have always said that we must stop operating in silos, that the monetary policy must have a handshake with fiscal policy or fiscal authority. Fiscal authority must also have a handshake with trade authorities, and trade authorities must also have a handshake with the monetary policy authorities. But it would appear in this case, against the backdrop of some of the ripple effects already, cost of borrowing and so on and so forth, if we were to look at public borrowing alone, and there are already voices of concern about the cost of public borrowing and the cost of debt servicing. We're spending nothing less than 80% of our receipts to service debt. So whether you are a private borrower or a public borrower, you are impacted by all of this. As the CBN intended to take a tunnel vision rather than having a wider view of the implications of its NPR on the macroeconomic environment.
That's a big one. Thank you very much. That's the stuff that PhD theses are written on. This question you just posed, sir.
Thank you. Are you asking me to go and do a PhD?
Perhaps you want to try. You know, I mean, this is a very, very important question that even the Fed and co, they've not been able to solve them because, again, you want to ask yourself, should monetary and fiscal policy move in tandem, or should they balance each other? Should they try to balance the excesses of each other? But before I go to talk about that fiscal challenge, is that I want to agree very much with Professor Waleke. You know, the fact that, look, I actually, when one newspaper sent me a question to predict what the MPC was going to do, I said, look, I don't do prediction, but what I expect that they will do is to hold the rate, because, in fact, it has been seen that in trying to manage inflation, when you continue to increase the rate, you can precipitate a recession by so damaging the real sector that things now begin to really slow down your own growth. But I like the fact that, as you have said, as he has also said, the bigger implication in terms of cost of borrowing and the implication on even the debt servicing that we're having is momentous. So I probably would want to appeal to the Monetary Policy Committee, given that it's not just about central bank. In fact, the result yesterday was that one member voted for 50 bips, you know, which is 0.5% increase. 4 voted for 1.5% increase. No, one member voted for 1.5. Okay, what I read. Then maybe the majority, 7 or 8, of course, of them now voted for 1%. Yes. There are different things they are seeing, and of course they are working on data, and of course data is also very dynamic in nature, so there are different things they are seeing. On the flip side is that they are also trying to see how to, for one, reduce capital outflow, be able to also attract more funds. Maybe government has a view. In fact, if you look at 2023 budget, there's a large deficit in it, which they hope to finance by local borrowing. So you'll see that government bonds will now be trending back at 13-14%, okay, with a view to being able to pull that in. However, also the academic argument can be made whether increases in interest rates levels actually does slow down inflation according to what it says in the book. How long does it take? You can see that we've increased interest rate about 4 or 5 MPC meetings now before this inflation started to slow down. Is it slowing down on its own as a result of other factors? In economics, we never look at only one variable. There could be 6, 7, 8 variables affecting that interest rate, apart from your interest rate that you're increasing, that inflation, apart from your interest rate that you're increasing. Now, sir, regarding the fiscal policy, we have a challenge, a major one. The ministers of finance will always tell you about how, oh, we have a revenue problem, but what are you doing about it? Okay, so I think that what I've been able to conclude is that fiscal policy tends to fall under political capture much more easily than monetary policy, because the central bank is protected as a result of this independence, quote and unquote. It's not full independence, but some sort of independence. So it's kind of protected, and a lot of it is very intellectual, so politicians may not be able to barge into that space. But regarding the issue of maybe you want to increase taxes, collect taxes, the FIRS chairman made a statement 2 days ago. The FIRS was able to collect 10.1 trillion, first time ever. I think last year they got about 5 trillion. I mean, so it's almost double what they got. But he said that they were under tremendous pressure politically. There were instances where the same federal government, some parastatal will take the FIRS to court for trying to collect a certain whatever, a fee or whatever duty, whatever. They would take, and two parastatals are competing for the same thing. At the end of the day, nobody gets it. So I was wondering, why could the president not step in to say, listen, we're working for the same government. Well, if you as an agency, you're pursuing what FRS is, and you're taking FRS to court inside the same government. So that's the problem with political capture. I'm hoping that going forward, we continue to put these things out. Maybe the next government will do things right. But the fiscal policy is where we are falling. Monetary policy has tried, and monetary policy in Nigeria went into overdrive such that they even barged into the fiscal space with all the intervention that central bank is doing.
Dr. Fasher, thank you. Just 30 seconds.
Okay, it's just to say that, as he said, there are other factors, driving inflation, not just monetary. As a matter of fact, the significant part is said to come from supply side factors and things like insecurity, cost of energy, cost of electricity, and all these factors were even mentioned in the monetary policy communique.
All right.
That the central bank released, the MPC released.
Professor Uche Uwaleke, I'd like to thank you very much for keeping to time and for your perspective. Professor Uwaleke is a professor of finance and capital market, Nasarawa State University, KEFI. He's also President Association of Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Dr. Tokbe Faswa is founder and CEO, Global Analytics Consulting Limited. Thank you very much for joining us. And we also appreciate Dr. Afolabi Oluokere, who is Managing Director and Chief Economist of Analyst Data Services